Everyone, my name's Terry Rooch and this is Serious Automotive Training. Welcome back to another great module of mine dealing with General Motors service technology training. Today I want to pick up where we left off with powertrain performance. Two topics I want to cover today. The fuel pressure regulator, which we've discussed in the past, but we're going to get more in depth with it. We also want to talk about injector NOID lights. My training comes directly from years of working as an ASAP instructor and a GM technician. So all the information I give to you comes from General Motors courses and years of working in a dealership. So if you need to get a hold of me, seriousautotraining@yahoo.com. Just follow me on YouTube, subscribe to my channel, or just give me a shout out on YouTube for any questions or concerns for any material I provide to you. So let us begin. The fuel pressure regulator, the purpose of the regulator is to give you two separate modes of fuel pressure. Sure, it's a regulator, it's going to regulate at some point in between the two modes, but just think of this thing as two different modes. We'll look at it on the chart here. As the fuel pressure we checked at 55 psi previously using our fuel pressure gauge right at the Schrader Valve. So our 95 Corvette, our test vehicle for the course, is coming at 55 psi. Now, as manifold pressure drops, so closed throttle, high vacuum, we need less fuel pressure. So it drops anywhere from 3 to 10 psi. Depends on the calibration of the spring inside. So between 55 and 45, the fuel pressure will change according to engine vacuum. This is controlled by the regulator. So if you follow our chart up here, as we get up to zero manifold pressure, so wide open throttle, we are in a non-regulating mode. So you have fuel pressure is at its highest, 55. Now, if we drop back down here at 25 inches, we have closed throttle, we're sitting at idle, fuel pressure is lower. We are going to have down to 45 psi. So give or take, the chart's just a reference, it's not an exact, okay? Regulators, like I said, are set. So even though we're regulating the fuel pressure, think of it as two different modes, regulating mode and non-regulating mode, okay? So the easiest thing to do is if we look at our CBT here for the powertrain performance, you could see the fuel flow coming into the regulator, and as it goes through the regulator, it returns back to the tank. So the regulator is always on the back side of the fuel rail, okay? So inside the top, there's a calibrated spring with a diaphragm. This is where the fuel could leak, so always check this. Pop that vacuum hose off, make sure there's no fuel puddle in there. The old 3800 engines, that was real common. I'm sure you can see it on other stuff, but you get fuel inside here. The diaphragm starts to seep. Also, if we want to just take a look here at our next slide, it gives us a better illustration of what we're looking at with the two O-rings, okay? These O-rings tend to leak. Actually, I have a Hummer that's starting to seep right now with a 6-liter. So don't be afraid to pop that out. Change the O-ring, change the regulator. It could be leaking inside here too. The bottom one seals it underneath, and there is a screen here. So easiest thing, if you get that out, hold that screen up to the light somehow, look in it. The screen could be clogged. Okay, so let's go back here to our so the illustration's demonstrating to you how vacuum or low manifold pressure will allow the spring to be opposed, okay? So it'll pull the diaphragm up and the spring will collapse. That allows the fuel to be returned back to the tank, okay? Now the opposite's going to happen when you are at the low pressure. So when you're at the low pressure, the fuel pressure will be lower, be higher, because now the fuel is going to be allowed to return, okay? So don't get those confused. So good illustration here, it's just showing you how the vacuum pulled on that diaphragm allows it to overcome spring pressure. The fuel from the rail goes through the little port and back to the return line, through the return line to the tank, okay? So two different modes, regulating mode, non-regulating mode, okay? Now, some tricks you might want to find. Static fuel pressure for this particular vehicle is 55 psi. That pressure should hold for a good 60 seconds. If the fuel pressure doesn't hold, this could be the check valve in the tank. Obviously, if the fuel pressure is low, it could be a clogged filter. But what General Motors does is they recommend you remove the filter, use a coolant pressure tester, cap tester, pressurize that return line up to 15 psi. This will test the check valve inside the fuel pump in the tank. So that should hold for about 60 seconds at 15 psi. I've never done the test. I've seen them leak. I've seen them drain back, hard to start in the morning. But the best way to check that check valve is use that tool. It came right out of one of the GM course manuals to check that drain back. Okay, so with the fuel gauge installed, okay, we're right up to our Schrader valve. You could apply vacuum with the engine running and with it off. And you could monitor that pressure on the gauge. So you could see this change. You could see it go from 55 to 45. Now that's our 10 psi difference. These aren't adjustable. If you got a Toyota, you could adjust them. They have a little screw in the back. That's actually how you could see fuel pressure on a Toyota. You'll see the little plunger pop out. So on this one, 10 to 3 psi is the range they give you. It's not adjustable. Good. So next, the next thing we should talk about, the regulating mode. The fuel pressure could affect the performance of the engine. How do you know? Right here's this is the identifier, the O2 sensor. These could set codes, which we'll get into when we cover the scan tool. But the codes will either be rich or lean depending on the fuel pressure. So again, a leaky check valve, a kinked line, a blocked filter, okay? Or you could be leaking here at some point, which could be bad enough. So all those could affect what you're seeing off of your O2 sensor. Good. Okay. Now let's, for a second, we'll talk about the injector itself. On top of the injector, for the connectors, because we're doing lots of tests with these, with the different J39 021 tool, it's always good to do the drag test. So if you take one of the leads, actually I have the leads here in my kit. This is a Delphi kit with all the different style leads for my particular vehicle. So what I like to do is I like to do this drag test. I install it, make sure there's pin tension. After all these tests, you could spread the harness and it could cause you a lot of grief. Now, where am I going with this? Well, the easiest thing to spread those is right here. These are NOID lights. These lights will flash for you. Tells you the injector is firing. So you can see the size of those blades. It's pretty easy to spread an injector harness using one of these. So the way these things work, I have mine hooked up to the 39021 tool. So get the light going. I'll just simulate it using the tool with the test light, and the light will flash. So when the light comes on, that's how you know your injector does have the current coming from the computer to fire that. Now, because it's fused, always make sure that the fuse is good. If you have no NOID light coming on, obviously it could be a wiring problem, it could be the PCM, or obviously a fuse. Okay, it's usually fused in banks. There may be injector one side, injector two fuse. Okay, so always check the fuse. Now, next, we have another tool. It's the J34730-380. Great tool. These are real cheap on eBay. This plugs into your injector harness and crank it and fire away. These lights will illuminate to tell you that each of the injectors are firing. Okay, great tool. Again, real cheap on eBay. I just seen them for about $5. So it's a J34730-380. So excellent tools. The other thing I would just want to talk about is when you're utilizing these NOID lights. Okay, they have two different ones. Well, actually, I think I have a kit of 5. They have them for the throttle body injectors. Okay, but always make sure you check the resistance across that solenoid, because a solenoid could short out and pop your fuse. So you want real good real good light flash. And I showed you, I sent half an amp through these at about 14 volts, and they were pretty, that one I showed you was pretty bright. So let's just talk about what we covered today. We talked about fuel pressure regulator. Okay, the chart identifies that the loss of engine vacuum, wide open throttle, is going to give you the non-regulating mode. That'll give you the highest pressure. Hook up your vacuum pump if you want. Make sure you got good source on the hose. Make sure there's no fuel in the hose. So if you attach the vacuum gauge, that's when the pressure is going to drop. It's going to get you down to your regulating mode, anywhere from 3 to 10 psi drop. If you're not sure what the fuel pressure is, the J39021 booklet gives you your static pressures for doing the different tests. Okay, we illustrated to you the flow of the regulator here. Okay, and again, because the injectors are inside the manifold, that change in pressure below the manifold tip is the whole purpose of you having this regulating mode. Okay, and again, always on the return side. Now, some of the cars didn't have fuel regulators. They didn't have fuel pressure regulators because they were sequential port, and there wasn't that much change in pressure. So, bingo, you take an old 3800 or 3.8 for that case with a turbo, and because they were fired in an order sequentially, there was no need for that regulator. Okay, and some of these do have in the tank. If you have a throttle body injector, the old style, like I showed you with these, it's right in the throttle body assembly. Okay, so we talked about our NOID lights. These are available from all the manufacturers. I have some from Kentmore, I have some from Blue Point. Pretty cheap, but they work great. Always check the fuse, and again, different tools available for checking that the injector's firing. And always remember, after you're done with all this, check your blades, check your terminals, make sure that they're not spread, make sure that they don't pull out, make sure there's no problem there. All this stuff adds up. Oh, and by the way, the injector harnesses, the mice love to eat them. They love to eat that wire for whatever reason. It's good for them. So again, we covered the third video here on powertrain performance from General Motors. We covered the two topics, the fuel pressure regulator and the injector NOID lights. So any questions for me, SeriousAutoTraining@yahoo.com. I'm Terry Rooch. Have a wonderful day.